Welcome to the AEW Match Guide Podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Hello and welcome back to the AEW Match Guide Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you so much for joining me. Every episode, along with a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe or rate the podcast on your podcast app of choice, support the podcast financially through Red Circle, and make sure you check out all of the other great shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network, One Nation Radio, Keeping It Strong Style, All Things Elite, Tunnel Talk, the Trish Sarah Wrestling Podcast, Wrestle Art with Chris Things, and Imp's WWE Adventure that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. You can also join the Social Suplex community by joining the Social Suplex Discord, where you can chat directly to the hosts and other fans of the show about wrestling, sport, pop culture, and much more. And don't forget to check out the Match Guide Substack, where I drop my written pieces, and you can check out the AEW Match Guide list. Links for all of these things are in the podcast description. My guest for today is one of the hosts of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast, and is also a writer for Pro Wrestling Musings, Trish Spears. And we're looking at the Jon Moxley and Hangman Adam Page Texas Death Match from Revolution 2023. How are you going today, Trish?
I'm good. Glad to be talking about this one.
Absolutely. This was one that I was talking to you beforehand. When I was not podcasting, I'd see a program I'd see a match I'd like, and I'd think, oh, I'd love to do a podcast about this. And I tell you what, this match, it was, and this program in general was one that was just sending my podcast senses off. So it's really good to be back. And yeah, I'm really thankful to have you here today. I've got to say, actually, before we get into things any further, I wanted to thank both yourself and Sarah for your contributions to the Social Suplex Podcast Network. I have to admit that one of the reasons I got back was I felt very inspired by the additions to the team here at Social Suplex. Yourselves, Tunnel Talk, and Imp coming on for the WWE Adventure, and Chris as well with it's kind of a similar thing, but a very different vibe to what we do here on the AEW Match Guide. So yeah, look, thank you for what you bring to the Social Suplex Podcast Network.
Oh, thank you to everyone that welcomed us so kindly, and to Rich and Jeremy for kind of getting us on board. It was a great choice, I think, especially us and Tunnel Talk are absolutely kind of in love with being there. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's brought a very different vibe. Like, it's funny, you guys, there's a similarity to like how you do things, but you're also completely different at the same time, and it just gives so much flavor to the network. And yeah, look, I just wanted to thank you guys up front and let you and tell people that, look, if you guys haven't listened to what Trish and Sarah do and what Tunnel Talk do and what Imp's been doing, it's a great time to get around the Social Suplex Podcast Network. And as I said, join the Discord as well. I said that in the lead up. Trish, your channel on the Discord is pretty crazy. It moves very fast, but there's a lot of personality and a lot of really interesting chat on there.
I need a night watchman. I absolutely need a night watchman. You come back in the morning, it's like 450 messages, and I'm like, what on earth is going on? And it all ends in TJPW gifts, so that seems to be where it ends each morning.
Now, Trish, I first got to know you through writing about AEW on Pro Wrestling Musings back in the day, but I never actually found out how you got into AEW. So that's the question I used to lead off with, and I see no reason to change. What led you to becoming a fan of AEW?
So I was right from the start, because I was a New Japan fan. So it was just a crossover into that. And then one of the key things that got me kind of fully on board on top of that was Jon Moxley showing up at Double or Nothing 2019. So that was it. And from there, it's kind of been that journey all the way. So yeah, if you want to call it day one, you can call it day one. It's definitely changed a lot in the last 5 years, but I don't think anyone saw what it was actually going to become, or that it was going to become anything. It was such an unknown, and I think that was exciting at the time.
I absolutely agree. It's so funny to look back on the 5 years, because 5 years it's both simultaneously a long time, but also not that long at all. Like, you look at the WWE and how long the reality era, for instance, last, and that went for nearly a decade. But I feel like in AEW we've had like 3 or maybe even 4 different eras in just 5 years. Like, there's been so much change in multiple instances. Like, there was the initial setup, then there's the COVID years, and then there's the when they return and Punk comes in and suddenly that's like a big part of the company, and then he's gone and the company's different again. And it's crazy how much like radical change has swept through on multiple occasions in this company.
And that's kind of a cool thing when we're talking about this match today, because these are kind of constants for all that change, and these characters change, but they were kind of key people throughout each of these periods. Even when they kind of shy away, they're still kind of there. So it's kind of a nice one, because these are your key guys from the start. Page is potentially, you can look at him as, I know a lot of people do, as the main protagonist of AEW. And someone like Moxley is very much the heart, maybe the ace. I know people ban that word around a lot, but that one is quite fitting in this case.
That leads me into, I absolutely agree with you, by the way. Like, Hangman Page and Jon Moxley, you could say like both of them are the hearts. Like, there's lots of people
Absolutely.
there's a few people you could kind of throw in that, but at different points they have been like the pivotal figurehead and the emotional anchor for fans at different points. And both of them have had times where they've really been driving the company from, an in-ring, but also in a business basis. They've been really at the heart and at the forefront of what the company's doing. And even when I like what you said earlier, you kind of said, even when they haven't been at the forefront, it's almost like their absence has been very loud. Like, their silence has been very loud and they've been notable in their absence at different points. And I think we'll get into that when we talk about this match and sort of the goings on around it. But look, what you were saying kind of leads into what my next question is. It's, why did you choose this match when I asked you to come on? For those who don't know, we did the AEW match guide list, which was the top 50 matches that AEW's had. Trish very kindly voted in it and provided some great written words for it, and you can go and read them on the match guide. And so I asked her if she'd like to come on the podcast and be the first podcast off the mark, so to speak. And she could pick any match she wanted, and this is the one she chose. So I'm curious, Trish, why did you come to, given the pick of what you had, why did you pick Jon Moxley versus Hangman Adam Page?
The simple answer is, this is my favourite singles match in AEW. And that will be because... Great taste. And I know other people might pick out something that's more technically kind of sound, but for me, this was an emotional payoff. And I really get into kind of those sort of stories and things that you connect to, those things that feel bigger than just kind of one match, or who really kind of drag you into the story. And yeah, these are the two characters in AEW that I've always connected most with. So for them to have the kind of program together and this crescendo in this match was just such an emotional moment. And I think it was a really interesting time as well, because this is one where Moxie's kind of been at the forefront for so long. And then Hangman's kind of struggling to stay on the top and having to deal with this all kind of outside kind of things going on that kind of threaten his status. So it was really a coming of age moment for him as well. So there's just so many parts to it that make it special for me. And we'll talk through everything else in the presentation, everything as well. But maybe one of the things as well is it was never supposed to happen at this point. And so it was something that kind of grew naturally. It wasn't forced. It wasn't something that kind of cluttered along or was a long-term plan, but it felt like they were always going to come together at some point, and then when it finally happened, it just exceeded kind of my expectations. And yeah, I go back and watch it regularly. It never kind of loses anything for me, really. I can go back and watch it anytime, and there's not many matches like that just feel kind of not even a comfort watch, but just something that just every time I watch it just kind of sets me back and goes like, wow, that was fantastic.
This would be a very interesting choice as a comfort watch, given the kind of stuff they do to each other. But
maybe I'm just strange. I
don't know. We will probably get into some bleeding discourse later, so put a pin in that. But yeah, look, I'm not dissimilar. Like, anyone who knows anything about me as a wrestling fan will know that, like, these are basically my two favorite wrestlers in the world. So I love that you picked this match. And it's, as I said, like, when I wasn't doing this podcast, I was thinking I would love to talk about. This is one of the matches I was thinking I'd love to talk about. So let's get into it. As we always do on the match guide, let's give this match its flowers. So Dave Meltzer at the Wrestling Observer gave this one 5 of the big ones, 5 stars, the full 5-star treatment. As of today, Cage Match has this rated at 9.25. And when we did that match guide list of AEW's best matches in its first 5 years, this one came in 13th. So, yeah, look, as you said, for a long time, these two sort of felt like they were at some point going to collide, but they didn't. And this was a very well-protected match. But if you go back, wind things back to the very early days of Dynamite, there is actually a tag team match where Pac and Mox teamed together against Hangman and Omega. And it was actually the first time that Hangman and Omega had tagged together in AEW before they went on to, become tag team champions and have that incredible story together. This was that Moxley was involved in this first match. So I thought that was very interesting to go back on. I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, Trish, but I just thought it was very interesting that, even though this was a singles match that they waited a very long time to get to, if you wind things back long enough, they actually did mix it up very early on.
I think there's some things that actually transcend into this match that kind of come from that period as well. So when we talk about the match, you get the use of the chain. And one thing that sticks in my head from that is you just around that time, you had the Moxley Omega match at Full Gear. And in the promo, I think Kenny says to Moxley, this is back in August, but he says, "What are you going to do, chain wrestle me, John?" And then Moxley strangles him with the train in the match. And so that kind of plays in a little bit to the finish of the chain. It's just like these undercurrents underneath. There always is this stuff with Hangman. There's always undercurrents. But I always think back to that when I think of that match, and then I think of what happened in this one. So there's a little kind of fallback to the Omega Moxley stuff. And yeah, so that was such a different time. Moxley was such a different character then. And still kind of he was in the kind of tweener role, just about to go kind of fully face. Hangman was the guy supposed to be going heel at that point. And then that kind of didn't work out and he kind of blew up. But it's interesting that it's just those little exchanges that we saw all the way up to 2021.
I can't remember if it was in this exact match, but I loved that some of the interactions between Pac and Mox and how they really defined their characters, because they were very much like the early antagonists against Kenny Omega. And there was one time in particular that I always remember where, like Moxley was attacking Kenny Omega every which way he could, anytime he could. On that first Dynamite, he turns up behind Omega and they brawl to the outside and he puts him through the glass table. And a couple of weeks later, like Pac attacks Omega from behind with a chair and then offers the chair to Moxley, and Moxley's like, "No, I'm not going to attack him while he's down." It just like, so it was interesting how they used that sort of interaction to define Moxley's character as like this is a guy who's wild and he will do things that are outside of the norm and outside of the rules, but he's also not going to take a cheap shot in that way. Like, he wasn't going to attack Omega after Pac had his way. He's like, "Look, not on these terms. I'll do things on, in the way that makes sense to myself." And Yeah, it's just so interesting to go back and watch anything from 2019 because AEW has changed, like it just looks so different and everything sounds so different. And yeah, it was very interesting to just see this because I'd totally forgotten that this had happened until I went to the cage match for Jon Moxley and Hangman and went, oh, these guys have had a tag team match. We are probably going to have to fast forward though, as we'll have to do a few times in this. So as we said, like these two were, probably two of the most high profile faces in AEW over its first few years, over its first 2 years, if not the two major faces for the company. And they were kept very well apart. The first time outside of that tag match that either man sort of entered the other's target was just in this awesome promo that Jon Moxley cut in August in 2021. It was the Dynamite before CM Punk arrived. And I always remember this promo. I just love this promo so much, where he talks about how all of a sudden everything thinks that they can come in and be successful in AEW, and everyone thinks it'll be so easy, but he knows how hard it actually is because he's the one that carried the flag for the company, and he specifically calls out other title pretenders. He calls them pretenders, Hangman and Christian, and like rips into both of them, saying that they're both too weak to carry the company like he had. Trish, do you remember this promo? Did the promo stick in your head like it stuck in mine?
Yeah, it's probably the last great Moxley promo you remember before he took his sabbatical.
Yeah.
And it was at an interesting time because it was at a time where things felt like they were changing. There was things that felt like a certainty just before the 5v5 elimination match between the Elite and the Dark Order. And all of a sudden, nothing felt certain anymore. And you knew that Punk was coming in. There was the expectation that Bryan was going to follow him. So there was this kind of not knowing quite what was going to happen. And as much as that's kind of exciting, it's also kind of scary and sometimes as well. And it was always going to cause people to reassess their position within the company. And you kind of see Moxley doing that within his character. Like, okay, these people are coming in and these people are trying to step up, but I'm still the top guy.
I thought it was, I always remember it because it was the first time that he'd mentioned Hangman as well. And I think he says like Hangman's too weak. I'd like drink him under the table, which is on reflection is very interesting thing for him to be saying.
He calls him the White Knight on the White Horse.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is interesting because when you get to this match, by the time we get to it, Hangman's fully in black gear, black leather jacket, black trousers, just completely. So that light to dark thing you can kind of play off. It's kind of cool when you think back to that imagery. But the other thing is that he says is he calls himself like I'm the top of the food chain. And when you get to the promos in 2022, when you get to October, he leads off with that. So he's still using that same imagery, that same thing that drives that promo that he was talking about with Page becomes what he uses into the program itself.
And it's interesting that you brought up that White Knight on a White Horse thing. And it's interesting how that contrasts the two as characters, because even though they were like the two major faces of the company, they had they've got very different characters in terms of what they'll do. Like to compare them in big championship matches, like if you look at Moxley and MJF, like the paradigm shift, the Death Rider, it was paradigm shift at the time, was banned for reasons. But he hits it anyway because he saw that MJF was about to cheat. So he's like, well, if you're going to cheat, then what's good for you is good for me. And he hits it and wins. Like he's willing to go there. But in his match with CM Punk, had a Hangman picks up the belt and he casts it aside. He's not willing to go there. Like even though they're guys that will go hard in the ring and, they're very admirable, courageous, have lots of things that are to be admired, they do have like a different moral code in some ways. And it's interesting how that contrasts.
And it's interesting looking back now where Hangman is starting to abandon that moral code and how that journey has progressed. And then even when we get to this match, there's a moment where Moxley kind of abandons the moral code of the match and the fans boo. So there is a journey element to them. But there is such a difference in the way that they approach things, and that really comes out and it makes them come in together all that more interesting. So.
And they would actually face off against each other pretty soon after this promo happened, when Hangman was the final entrant in the casino ladder match prior to Full Gear, to see who would face Kenny Omega at Full Gear, and Hangman was the final entrant into that casino ladder match, and he would knock Moxley off the ladder to get the title shot against Kenny Omega at Full Gear. So they sort of came to blows at the top of that, and then when that happened, Moxley would then enter the number one contenders tournament to face the winner of Hangman and Omega, the world championship match at Full Gear. And he beat the absolute piss out of Preston Vance, the Dark Order's number 10, in the first round before he pulled out to go to rehab for alcohol addiction. He was replaced by the eventual winner, Bryan Danielson. And I don't know, like, you know more about the backstage going-ons of things, Trish, than I do. And it seems pretty clear that Moxley was being lined up to be Hangman's first challenger as champion. And because we'll probably never get another chance to talk about it on this podcast at all, I'm just curious what you think it would have been like for if it had been Jon Moxley to face Hangman in those first matches as opposed to Bryan Danielson. Of course, like, Hangman and Danielson had incredible matches there, but I imagine it would have been a very different flavored feud.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, they had the casino ladder match. You know, probably one of the most underrated. Oh, that pop is just incredible when Page comes out, and Mox takes the most hilarious fall off that ladder. He hates ladders. So that always sticks in my head. But yeah, this is the program that was supposed to be, and then see Moxley couldn't compete. Hangman even gave up his drinking gimmick in the wake, which I think kind of went unnoticed. And then Danielson basically steps into what Moxley was already doing. So you mentioned that Moxley destroyed Preston Vance in the tournament, and then Danielson steps into destroying each of the Dark Order in the run-up to the match. Moxley and Danielson are such different characters. So people wanted to cheer Adam Page after the win, and that helped with turning Danielson. Because normally when you turn someone, they just come into the company, it's really, really difficult to get crowds to boo them. So that was always going to be a challenge. I think if we'd seen Moxley, it would have definitely been more promo-based. We would have got, and it doesn't mean long, because both Moxley and Page are very, very good at the short promo that gets everything across without having to go on forever. But we definitely would have seen more of that. I think it would have been more personal. And that was the thing that I didn't feel with the Danielson thing, is that it wasn't made personal as much, whereas Moxley, straight away, everything is personal. That's just how he makes his programs, and Page has kind of followed in that mold somewhat in recent years as well. So you definitely would have got more of that, and it probably would have moved into a more violent place than what Danielson Page did the first time round. You know, not the second, obviously, because Danielson bled absolute buckets. Page bled buckets when they did the second one on January 5th. But yeah, it would have had definitely a different feel, a different flavour, and it would have been maybe easier for Page in terms of facing somebody that's been in the company for a long period of time. But that shouldn't take away from what they did with Danielson, which ended up with two fantastic matches, and it really felt like the coming of age moment after winning the belt to kind of shore up, this is who I am as a champion.
More of a passing of the torch sort of feud if it had been that, because, of course, Kenny Omega was the champion for, nearly a year. But at the same time, Jon Moxley sort of still loomed large as a very big presence and still as that lead face of the company, even having a number of very high profile IWGP US championship matches, and still being booked very, very strongly in the wake of his loss to Kenny Omega. And he was protected incredibly in that Omega feud. Like, he came out of the Omega feud looking stronger than Kenny Omega. And I think even in that promo that we talked about, he says something like, it takes an army of elite geeks to keep me from that Kenny Omega's title. Like, if he wanted to, he's like kind of almost say, if I wanted to, I could wade in and get it now, even now. And so it would have been a much more immediate passing of the torch of like, okay, this is now the number one face in the company. Whereas with Danielson, it was more like, I am the greatest wrestler in the world. And of course, everyone watching AEW knows Danielson's reputation and knows that it's not just bluster. Like, that is something that's backed up. But yeah, I think you're right. I don't know. I kind of, part of me wonders what Hangman's, what his title reign would have looked like, and how it would be remembered if, like, this feud that we're going to talk about now had been then, like, had been a year earlier. A year earlier, rather than being in 2023 after, they both lost the championship and there's so much water under the bridge. I don't know. It's just a weird thought that I've got in my mind that I'll probably never let go of totally.
No.
And I'll probably be like fantasy booking scenarios in 5 years' time. This is what would have happened. Like, I do actually. It's what I do. It's what I do for Dean Ambrose 2016 in fantasy booking. Like, what if he'd won that Royal Rumble instead of Triple H? Or, like, what if he'd been the one that main evented WrestleMania 32 rather than Roman Reigns and Triple H? Yeah.
See, that's the funny thing with these characters. So yeah, I rue that time and I think about it, and I think if you hadn't taken certain things away from Hangman during that period, would it be different? But I do think that they have such similar career paths in some ways. Like, going from a group, their first kind of stay at the top, maybe being overshadowed by others or being kind of underrated. So I do think they follow similar career paths, and they are so similar as kind of wrestlers at times in terms of their adaptability, in terms of, they're very much private people. They have that line between wrestling and not wrestling. So there's so many things, and some of their mannerisms are quite similar. It actually makes me smile sometimes. So yeah, it's kind of funny to bring up Ambrose, but it's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I absolutely see the point, and yeah, I think about it all the time. Does it change things? But it makes them, we got where we were, and that leads into where they are now. So it's hard to look back, but I can see how it could be so different for sure.
Yeah. Okay. We're trying to stick in 2021, the fun time when the vibes were high. We're going to have to fast forward to a much less fun time.
Yeah.
grab your hat. It's 2022 and Brawl Out's just happened. Trish, I'm sorry. So of course Brawl Out happens. Mox and Hangman are both in that tournament for the AEW title after CM Punk had to vacate it because he was injured, amongst other things. Jon Moxley ultimately wins the tournament, beating Bryan Danielson in the grand final at Grand Slam. But at that same show, of course, Hangman Page wins a battle royale to become the number one contender, finally putting these two in line for a match that I'd been waiting for a long time and looking forward to. We're not going to go into the feud blow by blow, although it seems like we're doing a pretty good job of that so far. But these guys have like some incredible promos heading into their first match that I want to sort of really dig deep into. Firstly, like a week or so after Hangman's won that match, he has another match with Roosh, who he knocked out of the Battle Royale to win it. And after it, Moxley comes out to like open proceedings, saying that he's been waiting 3 years to face Hangman, and that between them they've beaten just about everyone in AEW except for each other, and that beating Hangman will mean Mox is not only world champ, but he is the one true top guy in AEW. It's like super intense, and even more so when like Hangman challenges him back. Moxley says he's like a nice kid, but he needs to watch his mouth because it will get him into trouble. We're wading into territory here, Trish. Next week in Toronto, I'm going to have to be held back for like quoting this promo verbatim, word for word, but Moxley like goes into the ring first and he reinforces his points from the week before, saying the world champ doesn't have the luxury of being anxious. They don't have the luxury of fear, doubt, or hesitation. And he says that Hangman isn't the same guy who knocked him off a 20-foot ladder a year ago. So, Trish, before we go into Hangman's like awesome response to this promo, what did you think of them like anchoring and starting this feud around all these accusations that are hanging around? I feel like Rick Ross, accusations hanging around Hangman Page in the wake of the way that, he kind of disappeared from booking after he was world champ, and then also the fallout from Brawl Out and the things that Punk had said to him in the press conference, and, all that had happened in the lead up to that press conference around Hangman as well. What did you think of them sort of anchoring and starting the feud mired in that sort of muck?
I think it made sense. Page is very much a guy that will do that. they will not shy away from it, but he will use it into story and try and make something out of something, even like that. And, this match came about because he didn't say anything after All Out. So because he kind of kept his mouth shut and put the company first, the reward was you're going to face Moxley in the defense that he needs to be presented as a strong champion before he loses to MJF. But what was really kind of clever in this is that Moxley kind of sets him up for all of this. So when he cuts that promo after the Rouge match, he's literally talking about backing him up as a person. So he's like, I respect you in the world for your abilities. I respect you in the world for your talents. I admire you as a person. Then you're a sweet kid, and a lot of sweet kids around here say dumb shit. Your mouth gets you in trouble. So he does all the setup. And there's a key line actually in this that is the beginning and the end of this feud. So he actually says, I'm going to break your face and I'm going to choke you until you turn blue because you're in the way of me being the one true top guy. And when we get to the end, you see where we end up. It's exactly where it starts. So Moxley plays into this perfectly. He does the entire setup. That whole promo in Washington is just a setup for the reply. And it's similar to what they've done with Swerve and Hangman. So if you watch the promo after All Out that Swerve cuts, and then watch the one just before Full Gear, they're mirrors. And this is exactly what these two are. They're mirror promos to give Hangman the opportunity to kind of tackle some of this stuff, to get some of his thoughts out there, his emotions out there, to build it into the story, into his character, to not ignore it, because he can hear the reactions. He's very much like Jericho. You'll see him come out and he puts one boot up and you can hear him listening. So he's always in touch with that. So there was no point hiding behind it. There's no point not doing anything. He's not allowed to address it kind of media-wise. So yeah, just go head on. I absolutely agree with what they did.
Yeah, I really like this promo, obviously, but it's interesting to compare it to like the more direct sort of reality era stuff that CM Punk and say MJF do, where I don't know, I feel like it's like this is one step into the fiction. It's still talking about the stuff that we know is going on, but it's almost like they're almost like avatars for what's actually going on, and so there's still a lot of the fiction involved in it, whereas the sort of CM Punk, MJF, and it's not that Jon Moxley and CM Punk or MJF the only ones. Like Eddie Kingston does this as well sometimes, but it's far more pulling the curtain back and directly referencing, whereas these guys are being a bit more indirect about it, and they had to. Like I think they had to address what's going on with Hangman and what had been said around him, because everyone knows it. Like, even though it happened at a press conference, everyone knows about it, and everyone can see like the dark cloud that's sort of following him about. And I like that you brought up what Moxley said. I didn't pick that up actually, that he sort of foreshadowed the ending of the feud, but in my mind I'm now thinking of, because he's like a real, even though he's a very odd character, Jon Moxley, like the real person, but he's a total wrestling nerd. Like, he's a total wrestling tragic. And I'm wondering if he like had the idea of, or if maybe even Hangman as well had the idea of him hanging Jon Moxley over the ropes at the very start of this, as being like, this is going to be where we're working towards eventually. So let's say it now, and then it will be an awesome callback when it does happen one day.
It's one of them. So I don't think they were ever planned for more than the one match at the time.
Yeah.
I think that came afterwards. But yeah, they are both absolute nerds. They are both similar in that regard. So yeah, they would have taken absolute note of it, gone back, watched it, and gone, actually, we'll do this, and it all fits. So yeah, there's a funny line actually in the Moxley promo in Toronto just before the Hangman starts, where he says, he's talking about being world champion. You mentioned, luxury of being anxious, but he's also like, a lot of people can't handle the pressure and they crumble under it, some faster than others. And his tone is just hilarious. But that's the way he kind of takes his little shots, because there's such a fine line with work shoot stuff. You can pull the curtain back somewhat, but if you pull it back too much, you undermine everything else. Yeah. I think you've said something similar recently as well. But you absolutely kind of make everything else not feel as real. So if you can work this into your character, then it's great. And the whole idea of this program is that this program is about respect. So these guys respect each other in that position. He's not coming at Hangman looking down at him in that sense. And they made that point of that because the idea is to build Page back up in it. And, the first thing that Page says to him is, whatever you have to say about me, I want you to say it to my face when he comes out. And that plays into all this Punk stuff as well, because nothing's said to Page himself. It's all around him. It's all in the media. It's all the press conferences. So they played that straight into this, and this is the respect thing. You say this to my face now. This is how we're going to get around it. And it was nicely built in. I love the way they did it.
Yeah, well, let's get into Hangman's response because this was something special. Like, this is one of the best promos I think Hangman's ever done. He brings up how Moxley called him a kid. He says that he should never have hesitated and lost that title. He brings up that he failed to win the trios with the Dark Order, his best friends, and how they seem to be slowly leaving him. And then he says that his old friends are just gone, obviously referencing the Elite, who at that point were still suspended after everything that happened at Brawl Out. And for all, Hangman says, for all he did, he's left with nothing. He isn't the same. He's angry. He's frustrated. He can't sleep at night. He's anxious. He's depressed. The meds aren't working, but he's still here because he is a man. He says that he's watched his family members be lowered into the ground. He's brought new life into this world, just like Moxley. He's a husband, a father, and he's been beaten over and over, but he keeps coming back because he is a man. Trish, like, this promo is just incredible. It feels like he's had it bottled up inside him for months, and he just wants to like run to the top of a mountain and scream it out. Like, he's not giving up.
It's so memorable. There are a few promos in wrestling these days that are memorable. There's even fewer that I can recall kind of word from word any sequence from them. But this is it, because the words, I'm not the same. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I can't sleep at night. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. The medicine is not working, but I am still here. Like, that's some of the most powerful stuff you can think of. This is something that, especially, he's the anxious millennial cowboy. People in that generation, that's how they feel on a day-to-day basis. God, it's how I feel on a day-to-day basis half the time. But we relate to that so much. And it sticks in my brain. And it's no surprise that you'll see this appear, on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. All the time. It'll come back up all the time because it resonates even now. That moment, all that stress, everything that was built up inside him that he delivered in that way still resonates with people now. And immediately this match became so much more important just off the back of that promo. And if promos are about, talking people into the building, it did exactly that, and people responded to that as well. And this was under the mara of having the MJF stuff over the top. If you listen to the crowd during the promo, that's very much terrible. Involved. Yeah, it's the same with the Danielson match at Grand Slam. It's a disaster. I hate it, but it's he has to deliver that under those things and turn that crowd for him, and he does it. And it's just one of those. It's when you're put under extreme pressure like that, and this is a pressure situation where everything that happened, and you can deliver like that, it says something about you as a character, as a wrestler, and even as a person for him, in terms of his strength. But and there's a lovely moment actually when he finishes that first bit where Moxley kind of nods to him a little bit, and he's kind of like that a boy. And I absolutely love that. But it's, Mox builds it, he creates the opportunity, and then Hangman delivers that, and it's something that he should be proud of, for sure.
I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it there, but like, this is literally like, this is career on the line stuff for Hangman, because he goes out and flubs here. Like,
he would have been murdered. Look at where he was at that point in time.
Yeah.
He's not allowed to talk. He's not allowed to say anything publicly or defend himself. So all he has is this.
And you can see how quickly, like, Tony Khan would have, like, look, I don't want to go too much into it, but I feel like he would have been very quickly thrown under that bus and sacrificed at the altar of CM Punk if he had flubbed this. Like, you talk about high pressure, like, this is huge. And like, he's probably, I don't know what his contract situation was like at this point, but like, he probably has plenty of money, but I doubt he's got enough money to like never to like, be able to not work again at this point. Like, talk about high pressure. Like, going out to deliver this as a man. And yeah, like you called it out, like this is something that just resonates so much with me in a way that very few wrestling characters do. And it's because Hangman's just like, he's a different wrestling hero. Like you look back over the history of who the top guys are, and they're guys like Hogan, Cena, Austin, like, you know, they're very different people, but one thing they all have is just boundless depths of confidence. You even go like, look at WWE today, Cody, or even AEW, like Jon Moxley, MJF, like these are guys who just have never ending depths of confidence. But Hangman is someone who is racked with self-doubt and anxiety and depression. And like in this, the storm clouds have come in and he is at his lowest, but he still like wants to be there. You know, and this is a part of this promo is like, it's far more aggressive than any promo he's ever done. He's like shouting from the depths of his frustration and anger, but he's like still resolute. And yeah, like I find this just so inspiring hearing these words and seeing this promo.
And that's why there are so many people that connect to him in a different way. He's ours in that sense, because he represents the struggles that we all have. He's not an unattainable guy like a Cody or even a Mox to an extent. He's something we can connect to. And I think it's the same, you know, I get in trouble
Eddie
for how
Kingston.
much I talk about. Yeah, Eddie Kingston's exactly the same. But everyone knows kind of where Kingston's ceiling is, if you will. But this is a guy they know can be at the top. So there's that further investment. That's unfortunate reality sometimes in wrestling. But it's, yeah, he's real in that sense. In a way that just most aren't real. And it just, that is why even now, you know, no matter how many times, you know, in a meta sense that he's buried publicly or anything else, there's still a huge part of this fan base that just connects to him, that lights up when he comes back. Who will light up when he comes back, you know, if he's back at some point in the near future. But that is so key. And it's because of things like this. It's because he can deliver things like this that let you look into him as a character, maybe as a person, but in such a way that you can't let that connection go. You can't just look at it as another wrestler. And that's special. There aren't many people who can deliver that. And that's why no matter what you do with him, he can always find his way back to the top.
I should note that as we record this, we are in the midst of a Hangman drought. So you know, if you're just referencing that, that's why we're currently. I'm not sure where this is going to go out. Probably in a few weeks time, we'll see. But hopefully not too long. But yeah, we are in the midst of a Hangman drought. So you know, if we are talking, that's why we're referencing that in some ways. We are going to have to blitz through these matches and promos because there are a few of them. Of course, like the first match that we were just building up to there, it goes dreadfully wrong. Hangman gets collected by a lariat from Moxley and lands horribly, knocked out legitimately. The match ends early, 10 minutes, like 5 or 10 minutes early. So Moxley's kind of like going off air, talking, trying to, you know, finish the show. There's doctors around Adam Page. He's not moving. Look, this is like, it's scary, legitimately unsettling stuff in a way that you don't want wrestling to be. Like sometimes wrestling is good scary and good unsettling. This is not. And one thing I wanted to say though, like while this obviously wasn't the plan for the match, it does add like a little bit of spice and a little bit of extra like emotional pain and torture and heft to their feud when it gets going again. Trish, your reflections on that and also obviously the match.
Yeah, it's the starting point. It's really the starting point for the actual program. So everything that come before, as powerful that is, was just for that kind of short cycle. But now it opens it up and they use it as a base. And again, they don't shy away from it. They build everything in. So all of a sudden, this lariat that knocks out Adam Page to the point where, you know, he cuts the promo where he's saying he couldn't remember his son's name for an hour, gives it like a human depth. And they just play straight into that. So it's one of those things. It was an unfortunate accident that was, horrifically scary at the time. I knew what it was exactly as soon as it happened. freaked out like everybody else did.
Mm.
But once it was clear that he was on the mend, then I thought it was great that they just went, you know what, we're going to run with this.
Mm.
And that was a natural thing. So when something like that happens, you can't just have him come back and not address it, especially a character like Paige. So it was great that they went straight back into it, and we're just going to go with it. And it was an interesting match because it was only really the second time that we got to watch Hangman play heel. And he has that adaptability, the same way Mox does as well, that he can just switch in between, he can change up his offense, his mannerisms. So that was kind of exciting because you got to see like, oh, he's not going to struggle with this, he can just flip it like that. And that is something that not everybody can do, is flip between babyface and heel in terms of wrestling wise. So that was really cool. It's a hard match to watch back. I watched it back yesterday, and it's actually really hard to watch back because you know when it's coming, so you have that foreboding. But it was just kind of building at the time, and it's one of them. You need to kind of see it as the starting point of the kind of main part of the program, but it's not something I enjoy watching back.
Yeah, it's almost like if it wasn't so obviously like a real stuff up, an injury. That it happened, you'd almost think it was what they planned, given what they just talked about the week before.
Yeah.
Like you'd almost think that this was the plan. And it is really, I don't know what the plan was afterwards, but it was so obvious that after this had happened, like these guys have got to mix it up again. Like, and it was great how they just naturally rolled into that. They didn't go, oh, we've already, planned out for Hangman to do this in the start of the year and Jon Moxley to do this. They just immediately went back to it, to the point where like I'd almost say like, oh, of course these guys were going to mix it up again after Jon Moxley had lost the championship to MJF.
And what Moxley did that was so clever, that was as soon as Hangman was ready, I think he was cleared in Chicago officially, that they then did the next promo of the week in Indianapolis, and he just gets it straight back out. There's no one can outwork me, out hustle me, out wrestle me, out fight me, out bleed me, or out sweat me. And, I'm back. I'm top of the food chain. So we're straight back to where we were previously. So you straight back to the same themes. You just pick it up as soon as where it left off. And he literally keeps saying, there's not a man in the locker room, not a man in this building, not a man within 100 miles. It's funny, check the 100 miles from Indianapolis. That's a funny thing. That has the balls to come out here, look me in the eyes and tell me any different. So automatically, we've moved past this thing of Hangman's not a kid anymore in this program. He is a man, so he's now an equal. So there's that respect thing straight away into this part of the program. But then he makes the joke, and that goes at Hangman's pride. And then that first match, in LA becomes about his word and his pride. And that becomes a constant theme then for the rest of the program.
Yeah, and when Hangman gets back, he's very messy. Like he's like sort of wildly attacking Moxley on sight, even before he's, cleared to do it. They're just multiple nights just brawling on sight. But at the same time, he's cutting like these promos on YouTube about how, he was, when he got knocked out, he couldn't remember his child's name at one point. And when they come face to face, there's just like so much fire between them. Moxley's pissed off that Hangman's getting sympathy when he's like, I just won the legitimate match. Like this is wrestling. Like I did what I was meant to do. I wanted to win this match and I did. Even though he's kind of expressed sympathy for, what happened and that he got knocked out and couldn't remember his kid's name. Like, you shouldn't be getting sympathy for this. This is what it is. And then Hangman's pissed off that Mox is writing him off, and he's just all over the place. And I love that there's like so many conflicting emotions, not just from like the wrestlers at each other, but even the way that they're acting themselves is they're conflicting with themselves in some ways going into this second match.
There's a lovely quote in the Road 2 actually on that one where Hangman says, I don't want this to be a sob story from here on out. It's a violent one. And he flips into that mode for that match and talks about, he talked about in the Seattle promo, I'm going to give you, 2 out the chamber sort of thing. 2 on the chamber, your name on, you'll get them at the Forum. So he flips into that. And then Moxley ends up in the position that Hangman was in by the end of the match. They flip the kind of how that feels between the two characters during the duration of one match. So that's a really cool little bit in dynamic.
Yeah, and it's interesting that at the end of that second match, they do like flip it, and then you can see Hangman's like, oh shit, I lost myself. Like he's like snapped back to reality and had a moment of clarity. He's like, I've just lost myself. This is someone I respect, and this is what I've done to them. And he's like then questioning his own actions in the midst of this like very heated rivalry.
Yeah, because he knows that Moxley has a wife and kid. You know, he doesn't want him to go through what he did when he couldn't remember his kid's name. And he plays that very well at the end of that. And then he has a promo segment with Renee just after that's fantastic. Even
incredible.
now, it's just one of the best little short promo segments that I can think of, because there's just so much in it, and so much between the way they interact with each other over this.
Yeah.
You know, he talks about how I get my word back and how important that was for me. And, you know, he at one point I think he says, "I gladly do it again." Like this bravado kind of comes out, but by the end he's asking Renee when it's portrayed like it's off camera, you know, how's he actually feeling, and he's still kind of in that mode. But there's a lovely quote in that, because Renee said to him, you know, that Moxley had said to her, he said that you really push him to be a better version of himself, that he both despises and cherishes you. And you can really feel that in this program, in this part. Like, at this point, he hates losing, and he's never been kind of knocked out, or felt like, he says, you know, I felt like first time in 3 years that I got beat. And how that kind of plays into his psyche. But in some way, it just makes him admire Page more. And you can feel that at times on screen. So there's so much in the little bits of their dynamic underneath that maybe go unnoticed on first watch.
And I'm really glad you brought up Renee. Like, the weight of them interviewing, like, how good is Renee Paquette? Like, she's had,
phenomenal.
you know, there's been mixed results in the past when they've kind of like involved her in Dean Ambrose feuds, and she's like, and it hasn't been able to, but like in this, the subtlety in it and how they're doing it, and like it's such a case of like everything is underlying, and you can see she's being professional, but there's like, you could see that she's in, like, this is her husband that this man is doing it to, but it's also like she respects him as well. There's you know, like so much going on there that's just totally unspoken, and the tension is thick, the air is thick with it, but they're still both doing their job, right? And they're doing what they think their job should be and playing that role, and it's just a fantastic piece of interaction in that. And yeah, look, she's just so good at playing her role in those interviews.
She plays off him so well as well. Like, they just have a natural chemistry when it comes to this stuff. And it works really well that she becomes in this sequence of kind of promos, little backstage things with Paige, because he starts to kind of lose himself again into all this. You know, he tries to take a swipe at Kip Sabian. He's the one that stands over in front of her and says, you know, I want to do the impossible and I want to knock Moxley out in Ohio. And she has to play off all of this stuff. And it's her reactions that are just as important as what he does in reinforcing that he's losing control of himself. So it's, she's such a great addition. And she's so crucial to this program in such an underrated way.
And then, as you sort of said, with Hangman losing himself a little bit, that plays into the third match where, you know, it's just as physical as every one of their other matches being. And Hangman's, you know, trying to beat Jon Moxley with a bulldog choke with his own move. And it's, you know, it's like just this bloodbath, but Moxley wins with a roll up because Hangman took his eye off the ball, and immediately Hangman's annoyed at how it was decided. But Moxley's just like, this is wrestling match. Like, I won it by fair means.
Yeah, and it's like that code of honor thing. So Hangman feels like he's broken the code, but he also has to deal with the fact that he almost got overconfident, that he got a little bit too into himself and wanting to be maybe something that he isn't as well. And I like the kind of, you know, he gets to a point at the end of the match, I think Moxie's doing like Starman on the floor.
Yep.
And Paige is absolutely furious.
Yeah.
And it's just, and maybe that's not something we don't normally see, that amount of cockiness out of Moxley as well. So it's that thing of them kind of getting each other past where they normally would be. But you could feel that Moxley, it plays on Moxley's pride when it said, this isn't a real win. And he, when we'll talk about the final promos, he very much is very upset about the fluke, the idea that this was a fluke victory in their kind of rubber match. And that's what drives him to give in to doing a Texas death match as well.
It's interesting for Moxley to where he ends up emotionally at this point, like into this feud, because like I've spoken a number of times on this podcast and I've written about it and stuff, but how Jon Moxley is a guy who develops respect in the fire of combat, and he always has been. Like that's been his character since he debuted in the Shield, really. It's what that brotherhood of the Shield was based around, like them having this bond that's forged in the fire. And that's, how he built the Darby Allin relationship in 2019 and 2020. And it's kind of what they went back to with Eddie Kingston. And then it became the basis of how the Blackpool Combat Club is. Like, we bleed together and that's how we become brothers. But it's interesting to see as these two progressed in this feud, they started from a point of kind of respect, but he almost loses respect for Hangman as the feud goes along, and as it gets more heated and as they sort of lose themselves to it a little bit, he's not having that response that he had, say, with Darby Allin, where they're bleeding together and he's like earning the respect that way, or Wheeler Yuta, where Wheeler Yuta does the Bulldog choke on Moxley, and it ends up with the Blackpool Combat Club respecting him, but Hangman Page, is the way he's acting is causing Jon Moxley to lose respect for him.
Do you think that part of it is that it feels like a real challenge to his status for Moxley in a way that maybe Darby or people in BCC didn't?
Possibly, yeah. Which is interesting when you think about him and Danielson.
Yeah. But then they were brought to a point of respect by William Regal. So
yeah,
it's kind of an interesting one. I've never really thought about the kind of connection between, it's a very good one between the Shield and the BCC in that way. So that was, that's a pretty cool point. But in the way that in terms of his character, that has never changed. So yeah, that's really cool actually to think about.
Yeah. Look, I have written essays about, they're now deleted, unfortunately. They're on my Google Drive. I'll put them on the Substack one day, but how, Dean Ambrose character is all about that, even to the god-awful James Ellsworth thing is rooted in this idea of friendship and born in battle. Anyway, let's not talk about that too much. Let's go to this incredibleness here. As you said, these two then decide after this third match that Hangman says is a fluke win and Moxley's just frustrated at that. They decide they're going to have a Texas death match. Just before we go into that, is there anything in particular you wanted to say about the three matches? Does anything stand out from them for you, or anything in their chemistry? Was there anything you saw in those that you'd like to point out?
They have there's a lovely flow to them in terms of watching, because they're so different in kind of, they flip back and forth, in terms of who's the heel kind of thing. So, and you get kind of individual moments of triumph and of despair. So especially in terms of the finish. But what they did is, especially with the kind of first two, is they established that the lariat is like a really frightening thing. It's something that can change careers. It's something that can change your life. And, when you bring that into a death match and you have a move that is as dangerous as any weapon, that's a really, really clever thing to do. But it's just, it builds. So the way that they do it is everything builds to this moment. So it does feel like a crescendo. And we have like little bits and pieces where they throw in stuff to kind of set up the forthcoming kind of BCC Elite stuff, and that really starts from the promos that we spoke about at the start. But yeah, the matches build in with the promos as well. I think the LA one, there's a little thing about the LA one and the Dayton one, is it highlights as well that Moxley can come back in and deliver a match like the Dayton one. Hangman came back in after that injury, after being knocked out, and then just went straight back into it. Nothing else, no warm up, nothing. Just so that just kind of tells you something about the level that these guys operate on. And it's a great sequence of matches. I struggle. I know we kind of discussed it briefly, but I struggle to think of a sequence of TV matches that were as strong, across the three, but so different in how each one was kind of laid out.
Certainly in AEW, like the one that immediately springs to mind is something we kind of briefly touched on earlier, Danielson and Hangman, like those two, in terms of like two TV matches that happened one after the other and evolved and built on one another. That's the one that immediately springs to mind. Funny, there's a common denominator there. I can't quite put my finger on it.
These guys are tremendously underrated, both of them. I know that sounds really weird to say about. It's a weird thing to say about Jon Moxley when you think of his push, and it's a weird thing to say about Adam Page. But both of them are underrated in terms of what they can deliver in ring, in terms of in-ring storytellers. Yeah. I think they're the best storytellers in AEW. In terms of putting everything together and generating that emotion, and that's what this sequence is all about. It's like every one of these matches plays with emotion in some way or another.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of playing with emotions, let's move into the final promos in the lead up. We started digging deep on those promos that set everything up, and these ones that kind of come just before the Texas Death Match are absolute crackers. So after that, the fluke, as you put it, you've got Moxley going out. I think they have there's like a tag match or something, and then there's a brawl afterwards, and Moxley's just bleeding everywhere, and he goes out to the back and he's in a staircase and there's just blood dripping off his face. He looks like an absolute animal, and he's just like ranting about how he's the apex predator. He's a different beast. He says, I'm a sick man. I do this because I like it. I live for this shit. I'm not the kind of guy you want to go into a dark alley with, because who do you think is going to walk out? You're a great wrestler and you're a great man, but you're not the same animal as me. And the way they shoot it, Trish, is just incredible. It's like WWE right now is getting a lot of praise for its like one shot things, but this is one shot, and at one point while Jon Moxley is just like ranting and getting in the face of the camera, the cameraman just has the presence of mind to pan down to on the stairs. There's just this pool of blood that's just sort of pooling as Jon Moxley like seems to like be squeezing it out of his head somehow.
It's one of Moxley's best ever promos. And I know people will point to more prominent examples along.
There's a lot of great promos from Jon Moxley.
Yeah. I think of, the one where he's kind of, we're the good guys is one that sticks in my mind. Talks about the Legends promo after All Out 2022. But this one kind of takes everything back. It pulls back and it shows it's the character as kind of its core. It's raw. Yep. It's Moxley is most raw, and that image of just the blood dripping down onto the staircase as he's kind of roaring through this, and it's like a roar. He says, he's talking about blood, and he's like, it tastes like victory, it tastes like life. Yeah, and there is that theme of life within all this, and how he kind of feels from this, and It's funny because we talked about the respect thing earlier, but he still goes back and he's like, you're a great wrestler, you're an even great man, but you're not the same animal as me. And he roars that. That was an absolute roar. And if you weren't going to buy this pay-per-view for this match, you were then. But it's like we talked about Hangman's promo before Cincinnati. It's getting people in the building. This thing did exactly the same thing. It's just phenomenal. It was everything that you want to sum up Jon Moxley with was in this, and it was 2 minutes. It wasn't 15. It wasn't. No, he didn't need that. It was like, this is how I am. This is how I feel. I'm sick of being told that what I achieved was just a fluke, and it wasn't real, that it didn't count. But I'm going to make it count this time because, what's he say? I will die to protect what's mine.
Look, Hangman is not to be outdone. Like in his go home promo as well, that comes pretty soon after. He's not quite as he doesn't roar it the same way that Moxley does. But he certainly like is kind of has a look in his eye. He's under a bridge, but he says, "I've got no title to lose. I've got no memory left. You've taken my friends away. This Sunday, I take it all away from you. I don't enjoy violence. I hate it to its core. But this Sunday, I will be the most violent person I can be because I need to beat you." It's a really interesting thing for him to say, Trish. It brings to mind immediately. I don't know if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings or not, but there's a great quote from Faramir that you may be thinking of, hopefully, where he says, "War must be while we defend our lives against the destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend." And I got those sorts of vibes from Hangman here, where he's saying, like, I don't love, I don't necessarily believe him 100%, honestly, but given what he's about to do, but I don't enjoy violence. I hate it to its core. But this Sunday, I'll be the most violent person I can be because I need to beat you. It's a beautiful little sign off. And, you know, I think probably Moxley takes the cake, but this is a great promo from Hangman as well.
Yeah, definitely. The Moxley one will always feel stronger, I think. But it just exemplifies where they were in their characters at that position as well. And his is all heart. You know, and he mentions, you know, you couldn't take away my heart because you couldn't carry it. And that was what was going to carry him into this match, where he does feel like he's got nothing left to lose. He has nothing left to take from him. You know, we've just had this period of time where Moxley's destroyed, you know, the Dark Order. He's destroyed Evil Uno to the point where, you know, Hangman has to kind of get him off him with a barbed wire fist. So
that's what makes him bleed before the promo. Sorry, I didn't note that down in my notes, and I was thinking what happened to make this happen. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. So
it's built off that he's literally at that point, and he takes it back. You know, I want that spot at the top of the food chain because it's for his pride. His is all about heart and pride more than anything else. That's what's driving him, and it can drive him to do things that he wouldn't normally do. And he knows that in this situation he will do. And we've seen him do that in the past. We've seen him have Texas death matches and be driven to a different place. And in this one, you know, there's one on the missing promo is the one on the Countdown show where he literally says, if you put me in a Texas death match, it'll be the end of you. And it's that kind of element of that darker side to him as well, that there always is, and that he's shown previously in the past. And that really kind of brings us in to San Francisco itself.
Yes, let's get to the match. An hour in, Trish. Let's get to the match.
I'm so sorry.
Look, do not apologize. I'm loving having this conversation. I've been waiting for a long time to have this conversation. So we get to San Francisco Revolution 2023, and Hangman comes out to Ghost Riders in the Sky. Oh, I love how AEW does these like special entrances every now and again, and this one just fits so well, like the story of a cowboy who has to change his ways. And, you know, he's got, instead of the orange and black and white, he's got red and black and white, and he comes out in all black in an outfit that he hasn't worn before. I just love how AEW, like, they use music so well sometimes in the entrances to really just highlight that this is a special moment for this character.
It's the first kind of big entrance he's got since Full Gear 2021. It's that first kind of big moment for him, and he would have had a big part to play in this because he is absolutely all over stuff like that. But yeah, he's full very much dark outfit, one serpent on his leg, which a lot of people connected straight away to Omega and the Elite, and that was that's the whole idea. But I like the idea that he was kind of bathed in the red light, and then when Moxley came out, everything was kind of lit up. So it was that kind of juxtaposition kind of kicks in straight away, and then you get straight into Moxley is attacked in the crowd. So very much like the first match, plays straight back into what happened in Cincinnati. There's no waiting on it. You set the speed of the match kind of straight away.
Yeah. Before we get to that, I was just trying to think of other special entrances, and the Hangman one, of course, connects with me because I just love Hangman so much. But like, I loved the Many Men with the guns. I immediately also think of Wayward Son with the Elite the first time they came back and had that. And then also Misery Kentara when CM Punk came out before the dog collar match. It just sets the scene so well for what is about to this is about to be a happening. This is something that's very important. So make sure you're watching and you've got your eyes set on it. I guess the Sting one as well, it comes to mind as well, how they, really gave Sting a very special entrance before his last match.
It's just full mood, isn't it? So it's not like this is just, this is a match, we're here to have fun. It's like that these guys are gonna kill each other in a wrestling sense. That this is
setting the scene
end
for the story. Yeah.
There was a beautiful video package at the start of that with Page, and it kind of really set up like this is the end of this journey, and then straight into the horses running across the screen. So yeah, it was a great usage. I quite like to see him come back with that one, actually. I think. Absolutely.
Yeah. You're right to point out that when Mox is doing his entrance in the crowd, Hangman jumps him, and that's how it happened in their first match as well. And they sort of brawl through the crowd. Both of these guys are just two incredible brawlers, and when they get into the ring, they just are throwing fists and elbows at each other. Mox, he's the first person to grab a weapon. He gets a ring of barbed wire, and he tries to get Hangman with it, but in perfect wrestling, in the way wrestling works, Hangman catches it and then forces Moxley back and gets it across his forehead, and Moxley's bleeding. I like that they don't muck around in this. They just get straight to it. They've had, the 3 lead-up matches that are already very physical, but they immediately get to the violence, Trish.
Yeah, and I like that they first went to the barbed wire, so you just had that with the Evil Uno stuff. So it made sense that it was like the first weapon of choice.
Now, I have to ask, Jon Moxley's bleeding here. There's a lot of talk about Jon Moxley and blood, particularly around 2022, I think was probably when it was at its peak. I definitely saw that in 2023, the people were still talking about it a lot, even though he very much, I feel like, tamed it down a little bit. But what is your take on sort of Jon Moxley and just the usage of blood a lot in AEW?
There's probably times where it feels unneeded. Especially in like kind of straight tag matches and stuff like that. And it's that old school mentality of it thinking infusing matches. But if you have it in every single one, it can sometimes be an issue in terms of its impact when you have a match like this. With something like this, he bleeds early, fine. He's barbed wire across the face. That makes more sense. I'm probably not as bothered either way about it, but I understand what the complaint is there for sure.
Yeah, I tend to agree. They, at times, and look, Jon Moxley is my favorite wrestler of all time, but he's not beyond criticism. No. There has been times where I think it has happened a bit too much. Sometimes it happens accidentally because, like many wrestlers before him, he's probably run the blade a few too many times and he's now got scar tissue all over the place. So it just kind of, you tap him on his forehead and he starts to leak a little bit. So it is, accidental sometimes, but I definitely think they've sort of noticed that and they have made a conscious decision to tone it down a little bit. But in matches like this, man, it's so good. Like it adds so much drama and feeling, and in the lead up it added as well. We talked about it in that promo, like how much it added, how much kind of emphasis it added to what Jon Moxley was talking about when he was talking about how he's a different animal. He's just got blood dripping and he's totally unconcerned by it. He's just totally different from anything that you or I could ever relate to, because if that happened to us, well, there's no way we would be, ranting and raving about it. We would be straight to the hospital. Speaking of violence and bleeding and all things terrible like that, like Mox immediately gets his own back before he pulls out a fork, traps Hangman in a triangle choke and just starts stabbing him with a fork. This is John. They made a big point of Jon Moxley's innovating this death jitsu thing, and I think it's a bit. I don't know. Honestly, I thought it was a bit dumb.
Yeah, I'm not so big on
but
that.
this is the best example of like him melding jiu-jitsu and deathmatch wrestling that I've ever seen, where he's got him with a triangle choke and he's just using it to stab him with a fork. It's like gross, it's visceral, but it's just like so badass. And it's just the first of like a string of very violent spots that they are about to do. Obviously that one like really stood out to me. What are some of the ones that stood out to you, Trish?
Yeah, so that one does, just because of the way the blood splatters. And then it's kind of a little pullback to kind of his indie days. You know, there's a lot of promos that people remember with him and the fork and that sort of thing. And yeah, he has other kind of callbacks. He does the curb stomp at one point as well onto the brick as well. So he likes to do that sort of stuff as well, kind of secretly. The big thing that I felt for me, a lot of the big spots in this one, is that they have an incredible amount of trust between the two of them, because normally you kind of set up your own big spots. And in this one of the ways that they shock you is that they at times set up each other's big spots. So, you know, starts with Moxley puts the barbed wire chair in the corner and you think he's going to go into it. He slides underneath and then Hangman goes head first into it like a proper charging bull. Bounces off and you can see like he's still part of his kind of hair and his skin kind of stuck to it. And it's the same thing when they do the thing on the outside. So Hangman sets up a barbed wire board on a chair on the outside and you come away from it, you forget about it, and then kind of it's like 10 minutes later when he chucks Moxley over the top straight into the board and you feel the shock of Moxley, but you also get that same shock because you forgot all about it and you didn't see it coming and it's just instinctive. And there's so much of that because this is such a fluid match. It just kind of flows from one bit to another. I always say my summary free word of this one is just like no wasted motion. There's no in between. There's no kind of setting everything up forever. There's always something that plays into each other. Even like, you know, you even get the kind of things that they're quirkiness. So you get the kind of the dumb bit of Hangman when he wraps himself in barbed wire to do the Ahara moonsault. And you're like, why on earth have you done that, you idiot? But that's kind of that thing sometimes where he'll do things that risk himself in order to hurt his opponent, even if it's slightly dumb. And then you get one of my favorite bits of this actually. Is they're kind of fighting on the apron and Hangman knocks Moxley down and he kind of falls into a chair and it kind of feels like a really kind of very boring setup and you're like preconceived and everyone's like aha, and the crowd actually kind of laughs with it and it's that kind of weird clumsiness that you sometimes feel with Moxley, but it's not, it's a trap. And then he's up and he throws Hangman head first into the barbed wire board and the chairs on the outside and it catches you just so unaware because you're just thinking this is funny, and straight away it's like bang and it's like that instant impact. And there's so many of that. I think he talked about it with Renee where he said, you know, I didn't want you to have to get the chance to think about it. It was just that shock, bang. You don't get that time and you can really feel that in this match, but also that all comes off trust. And it has so many parts to it because you have bits where it kind of breaks into a bit of a Japanese style main event match, but then it comes back into a death match and it just moves from one bit to another, but they keep the same thing. So there's still that respect right until the very end, until we get to the low blow. And they have that emphasis on what's keeping, the commentators do a great job of emphasizing what Hangman is kind of surviving on is his heart. That's what's getting him back up each time.
I cannot believe that the crowd chants for tables in this match. I just like it blows my Trish. I know you go to match. I've never been to an AEW match because I live in Australia. I will one day, and I'm looking forward to the day that I do. But look, if you ever go to an AEW arena and and someone next to you starts chanting for tables, it's your duty to punch them and just
that's
stop
fine.
that.
Yeah, that and I can't even deal with this is awesome chants. I hate that stuff and what chants, any of it. Yeah, no, it's unfortunately that's the reality of.
He's holding him in a single leg Boston Crab over a barbed wire chair, but we're going to chant for anyway. Look, enough of that. It's just it's a pet hate of mine. I've got to call it out. It's so annoying. But you mentioned in this match like the pacing of it and they aren't rushing. Like you talked about they're not slow. They're not they're not drawing everything out, but at the same time they're not rushing. Everything is still given time to breathe, and there's like a gap between something will happen, and there's the crowd are given a time to absorb what's happened. But they also then it will be on to the next thing of violence. And what happens? The violence is fast and it happens at the snap of a finger. But they aren't, they're not just rushing between these things either. They're giving everything time to breathe and the audience time to feel and get, because Jon Moxley is laying on most of this offense. He is laying out most of it. So they're really giving the crowd a chance to see and feel what Hangman is going through. And another thing I like is that they're not over dramatizing the 10 counts until right at the end. There's only like one or two really close 10 counts. And like, I think that pacing is the secret sauce to all of these Hangman and Jon Moxley Texas death matches, because both of them had a number of fantastic ones, like Hangman against Lance Archer and Adam Cole, and of course these ones, and Swerve, of course, as well. And then Moxley also against Lance Archer. He's had some great ones. These ones, like, I think the secret sauce to them is that pacing that you're talking about.
Yeah, because you're right, the first near enough full 10 count is after Hangman goes headfirst into the board on the outside.
Yeah, that's a sick
like
bump.
20, yeah, so crazy. That's like 15, 20 minutes in, and then you get, obviously you can feel it kind of building towards the end then, so then you can play into the longer ones with the brick on the curb stomp as well. So yeah, absolutely. They just get the pacing kind of spot on, and there's never kind of a feeling of empty air. So even when they're allowing that crowd to kind of breathe and pick that in, there's kind of, you can feed off the emotion in that period of time. So then you go straight into the next thing. So yeah, it didn't feel, I think preconceived is a good word. It never felt like that. It never felt like we were just going from spot to spot. And so many of these things felt like they were linked back into previous things or the kind of setups. And then they pulled the lariat in there as well. So you have, the King Kong Bundy lariat feeling just as scary by the time you get towards the end of this match. So lariat, everything that started is kind of back. And then what I really liked was when we get right towards the end and Hangman keeps getting up and he keeps getting up, and that heart is kind of winning through. You see Moxley kind of give up on his code a little bit, and he gives him a low blow. And the crowd boos because, we have all this violence and you can do all these other things, but there's like a code of honor in this violence, and he's the one that's broken it.
Yeah.
And it feels so, as much as we talked about earlier, he's willing to take these things. He hadn't been up to that point in this match. They treated it fairly. They were willing to kind of inflict this violence on each other without kind of cheap shots or without flukes, as he'd been so upset about in the build. And then here, he kind of moves in that way. And that's good because it kind of helps to foreshadow what happens after the match for Moxley as a character. So.
Yeah, you kind of see Jon Moxley starting to lose it even in, so he puts, as you said, he puts Hangman through that board on the outside, and that's like a really close 10 count as he goes back in. And when Hangman gets back in the ring after that, Moxley goes for the Death Rider and then for the curb stomp. And I found that his usage of the curb stomp's really interesting. And I say this particularly as a huge, the Shield were like the bedrock of my fandom. They're the reason I got back into wrestling, particularly Ambrose and Rollins. And like he uses the curb stomp so infrequently, and it's only when he's like at his most desperate. And in this case, he uses it on the bricks to get the 8 count, and it still can't take him out. And then that's when he picks the chain back up. And of course, Hangman then used it to pull in the lariat, which you sort of mentioned, but that's bringing that chain back into it that Moxley had brought in earlier. And then Hangman's trying to wrap it around Moxley's neck. And at this point, Moxley can see the writings on the wall. That's when he goes for the low blow. But it doesn't work, and Hangman picks up a brick. He smashes it over Moxley's face before rolling to the outside and hitting Mox with the buckshot. And then with the chain around his neck, he hoists him over the ropes and chokes Jon Moxley out over the top rope, forcing Jon Moxley to tap for the first time. What an incredible visual to finish on and finish this feud on, and really put a definitive exclamation point at the end of everything.
Yeah, and it was kind of it was so unexpected, wasn't it? Because nobody expected him to tap. I don't think he tapped in 10 years at that point. And I like what you mentioned about the
certainly not
stomp,
in AEW.
Yeah, he'd never tapped in AEW, and I don't think he tapped in 10 years in his entire career. So, but I like what you mentioned about the curb stomp, because he gives him the curb stomp onto a brick, and this is going to reveal how much of a Shield fan I was, but if you remember back, how many times Ambrose was curb stomped onto cinder blocks and things by Seth Rollins during that kind of betrayal. So I did love that little callback. But then you get the the 2 shots in the chamber. It finishes with the 2 lariats at a buckshot, and then the second lariat that takes him over the rope and then choking him out. And he finishes out again, as we said at the start, with that very first promo. I'm going to choke you to my face. I've been choked to my face turns blue. And that's how this ends. So it's a beautiful bookmark. If you look back, and we kind of don't tend to so often because we tend to, everything's very much here and now, but just everything kind of goes back, and that's how he becomes top dog. That's kind of how it all flows together from beginning to end. And yeah, you have that visual of the first time in AEW that you see Moxley submit to somebody else. And yeah, it was, to me, I think it's, even now, it's probably the best night in terms of feeling like the top guy of Hangman's career, which sounds really strange to say when he's been world champion. But that's always the way I think sometimes. This was the moment where it was like, okay, yeah, this guy can be a legitimate top guy.
And I want to give praise to Jon Moxley you talk about trust. Jesus Christ, like that could have gone so wrong. And obviously, like these guys have probably practiced it and all that, but like that is some serious trust. And even though you can kind of see his feet touch the floor, he like flails his legs in, like you get a sense of his desperation in there, and he like taps quickly. He does not draw it out. He's like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm dead. Like the Hangman's hanging me. I'm dead. And you just see Hangman, the way he does it as well. He's like pulling with his whole body. It looks so good. And yeah, you're right. Like this is very much a high point for Hangman in terms of where he sits in his career and how he looks in the pecking order of the company. And it's interesting how that plays into what happens next, because is there, just before we get into sort of what goes on next, is there anything more you want to say about this match, Trish?
No, I think we've covered pretty much all my favorite things about it.
Indeed. We're nothing if not extensive here, as I've said many times. Like it's interesting how after this, of course, it sort of converts into a full-scale Elite versus BCC feud. And it's interesting seeing how Hangman reintegrates into the Elite. Previously when he was in the Elite, he was very much seen as the fourth wheel, like the lower guy in terms of the status. But when he goes back into the Elite, he's often the guy that's giving that final line. Like it's not Kenny Omega saying, goodbye, good night, bang. It's Hangman Page screaming that we are the heart, we are the soul, we are the Elite, And it's interesting to see how like the standing he gains from this feud then like translates into his reintegration back into, this really like within the company, like this legendary this foundational legendary stable.
I think that one feels like a thing of two halves for me. So the first bit when he comes back and he delivers that promo, and that's another one with a monster pop that we don't always think about. Yeah, he absolutely is at the forefront, and I think as Omega becomes the kind of focal piece of the program going into the summer, that kind of shifts, and there's lots of little reasons for that. But I think that's something that they will work that dynamic of in future, and that gave them, they were able to work that and what happened. Even, he won, Blood and Guts again with the choke out on this time. Hanging Yuta, obviously with I think Matt Jackson hanging off his back. So he's actually got someone assisting him with. And
Moxley being the one that gives up.
Yeah, for Yuta. So again, he knows what Hangman can do, how much damage he can inflict. So he's the one that gives up and doesn't want to. He spares Yuta in that case. So there is some kind of nice kind of parallels through. But then the way he's kind of moved back into the background then plays into his Strickland program. So again, it's just that theme of working everything in. But yeah, at first it was pretty cool to see him stand at the front of that group, and that that's just should be something that they look to going forward, I think.
Absolutely, it's going to be so interesting to see how he reintegrates into everything now. Like Kenny Omega's been kicked out of the Elite, and it's Okada's in there now. And like, where does Hangman sit amongst all that? It's going to be very interesting to see how it all kind of comes back together. And I'm looking forward to him coming back in there, because like going up against the Elite, like it's good to see Swerve as part of that. But like, as we talked about Moxley and also with Hangman, like they always bring the heart and the emotion to it. And he's got such a sordid history with the Bucks in particular that you just know it's going to tug at the heartstrings, whatever happens, like whether he joins them and is facing off against Omega, with this time with roles reversed almost, or if he then sides with Omega against the Bucks, or maybe he's a bit of a wild card in all of this. Like, who knows where it's going, because you've got Swerve in there, you've got Tad Swerve in there. Like, it's going to be so interesting to see how he reintegrates into everything when it happens. I want to talk about Hangman in 2023 because, like, no one talked about him at the end of the year, the Wrestler of the Year. But he had a sneaky great year in 2023. Like, there was this feud which had, like this was a match of the year contender, the Texas Death Match, and also, like, two other fantastic matches as well as the promos. Then he was involved in the Elite BCC matches, which were also great. He did, of course, kind of go a bit quiet, as you said, like he took a back seat to Omega over the summer, but then he had the Swerve feud, and that's an all-time match against Swerve, hitting a lot of the similar notes to what this Moxley feud did. Like, he didn't get much noise, but I feel like at least within AEW, he deserved some hype for how good his 2023 was.
He's just sneaky in terms of what he actually delivers that goes unnoticed. So you look back at, if you look at Cage Match, look at the top 30 matches in AEW history and see how many he appears in. And yet nobody would ever look at him as, like, Wrestler of the Year, as you said. It's such a strange thing. I think some of it's that we don't always hear from him as much as we maybe should. And that can always make a difference. And it's the same with promotion as well. But yeah, he had a very, very good 2023, even when he was kind of pushed to the background. Some of the tags, the 10-man tag at Forbidden Door was excellent as well.
Yep.
That was a phenomenal match. But yeah, and I think this year we're kind of seeing a little bit of a turning on him. So in terms of, I think at the start of the year, people recognised once he disappeared, kind of something that the show lost, and maybe in a way that they didn't previously. So I think that kind of sets it out nicely. I think people will look back kindly on 2023 when they do start to look back and they look at the work that he put in and how, the two biggest feuds in terms of actually becoming feuds, because I think Cole and Max kind of never got to that point really, with everything that happened with the injuries. But in terms of actual full programs kind of beginning to end and what they achieved, then it will look back kindly, because you think in a way you can look at this Moxley program as helping to cement Hangman in terms of being a star in AEW, and then you can look at him with Swerve, establishing someone else, which is so hard to do, and something a lot of guys are very proud of, and girls, when they're able to do that. So yeah, it's I thought it was interesting. I think he got votes in the Observer Awards for underpushed, and I can see exactly why that was. But this year probably people will look back and think more of 2023 because of what they see in 2024, and kind of feeling him as being more of a guy within the company, I think, upon his return. But we shall see. I may be wrong. But yeah, it's definitely underrated. And Moxley's as well. Yeah, Moxley's 2023 is very much underrated too. They both went very much under the radar in a year where they delivered kind of some of the really big kind of secondary programs. BCC Elite was sometimes frustrating creatively, but also very successful and did have some huge moments. And then going into the fall, but you miss both of them. Do you miss both of them on TV at the moment? I think it's like a huge miss.
Oh, I absolutely miss Hangman. I cannot wait for him to come back. It's weird to say it with Moxley on TV, but he's not in a center role or in like an ongoing program. He's just kind of in and out currently. So yeah, I think I caught myself earlier this year just being like, I want him to get back into I think just generally, I want like non-championship feuds. Like and particularly Jon Moxley, because everything becomes so personal with him. So I want him to drop that IWGP belt. It's a great thing that he's got it. Like it's a great notch on his belt. Not like it's a great for his legacy to have held that title. But I don't think him holding it is a huge. Well, I'm not enjoying. Let's just say this. I'm not enjoying it as much with him being champion of New Japan as I would be if he was in some sort of personal feud in AEW. And I think part of the issue I would just generally have with the BCC as well is that they haven't been in like a good personal like rivalry beyond championship matches. And I think just generally in AEW as well, like BCC are a big part of AEW. Everything is over belts at the moment, and belts have a set of, like, they do have stakes to them. But except for, I guess the exception to that would be the elite, like the Young Bucks and Okada EVP stuff. But I don't know, that's not hitting in emotionally for me in the way that, say, like Moxley versus Hangman does, or like Eddie versus Moxley did, or Orange Cassidy versus Jon Moxley did last year, like where there's like, even though that is over a title as well, it's a very emotional thing. And it was a much more personal rivalry than what they're doing at the moment, at least. And part of that's just a function of the fact that, it seems like they've gone with Moxley that, we've got these new stars on TV. We've got Ospreay. We've got, we're trying to cement Swerve as the champion. And New Japan need help. So let's take you off. But then he went away for a bit, but then they sort of realized they were missing him and have got him back, but they can't have him back fully because he's a champion of another promotion, and they've got to treat that with respect because it's this isn't AAA we're talking about here. This is a major promotional partner who they do want to respect, and they do respect significantly. So that he can't quite be back in the muck of it all and in the messiness of it all as I'd love him to be.
They just add so much depth to programs, and I think that's the big thing that's missing at the moment. Is there's not really anything that feels like it has great depth.
Yep.
And that's
there you go. You nailed it with one line. I just spent like 5 minutes talking, and you just nailed it with one line, Trish. I've got two more questions, Trish. The first one, is this Jon Moxley's best match in AEW? So I asked this because when we did that match guide, the AEW match guide list, this was the highest ranking match that Jon Moxley had. So he didn't have a match in the top 10, despite being, like probably the most consistently pushed wrestler in AEW's history. He's certainly been the one with the most time as champion, probably the most wins if you were to go and add them up, certainly the most high profile wins. Is this his best match in your mind?
Yes. Pretty simple answer. I think this was the first 5-star match he ever got, actually, in AEW as well. So it's not just but yeah, no, this is his most complete match. This brings together all his elements that you see in other matches and kind of winds them all together perfectly. So yeah, this is absolutely for me.
As I frantically search cage match to see what if he's had any other 5-star matches. The ones that I immediately put it up with, the most immediate one is the Eddie Kingston I Quit match, which is very similar. Like we talk about personal stakes, like that was another one with like incredible promos in the lead up, setting up these incredible personal stakes and a really violent and emotional ending and a very like fitting ending as well. But I think in totality, I'd probably say this one edges it out. If no other reason than like that, you've got the crowd involvement and I'm picking between my three favorites there. Like we talk about special, there's been a lot of talk lately on Social Suplex about special boys, and that's pretty much my three special boys right there: Adam Page, Jon Moxley, and Eddie Kingston. So yeah, pretty hard to argue with that. And I think you're right about that 5-star thing. Just quickly flicking through his cage match. He's had like the Anarchy in the Arena was 5 stars, but that's obviously Obviously the original one was with the Jericho Appreciation Society, but that's like a group match. And then you've also got he had the match with Tomohiro Ishii in New Japan, which was 5 stars, but that was obviously in New Japan, not in AEW. So I think you're right there that it was his first 5-star singles match in AEW. Lastly, I actually brought up the Eddie versus Moxley comparison. I'm just curious what your thoughts are with how this compares to the other sort of long-term stories AEW has told over the years. Of course, you've got the Hangman Omega Odyssey, which was like very much the core of what AEW was for its first 2 years or so. I'd say like Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega had a pretty sordid rivalry. And then the other two that spring to mind are Punk versus MJF and Hangman versus Swerve. Where do you think this sits in them? You said earlier that this is your favorite, but where do you think this sits amongst all of those?
It's a hard comparison because some of them are so different. And then some of them are similar. So maybe Eddie Mox is similar in some ways. I think it's a difficult one. Hangman and Omega is like the story of the first 3 years. And that's such a triumphant moment. But I don't think there's anyone that moves me as emotionally as this one does. So, and I think the quality of matches ends up being, I think, does this one finish higher? I think it does. The thing is, we thought about this question. I thought about it previously, and yet it's still such a hard one to place.
Yeah, but it is.
It's so different from the others in so many ways, and this is a match between two guys then at the very top. So Hangman's and MJF's rivalries before then are journeys on the way up. There's like a power difference. And with this one, although you kind of begin with looking like there's a power difference, with the kid and the man stuff, it's very quickly kind of put to terms that these are guys on equal footing trying to fight out to be the top. And so that makes it so different. It's like a different era. It's definitely moving on to, looking at the different eras of AEW. So maybe that's why they don't connect in terms of putting one on top of each other. But it's just special. And it was during a period that was so difficult and there was so much going on. And again, I think when we look back, we'll think more of it in its totality than we maybe did at the time where there was like 100 distractions every day. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's very hard. I think like just the long-term achievement of Hangman versus Omega and just that whole saga, that sits alone to me in terms of AEW, what it is. Like in many ways, like I don't know if Hangman and Omega will ever be topped in terms of like the emotional investment that we all had in that Hangman's ascent. You actually put it perfectly in that AEW match guide list where you said when they had that elimination tag match that like it never felt like the result of a match had mattered more. I just remember being every single week being on like at work. So I watch AEW in the evening in Australia. It happens at around about, depending if it's daylight savings time or not, either it starts between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. 12 p.m. Yeah, 10 a.m. and noon during the day, and I would be at work every single week during that saga. I would be at work just like waiting to get home to see what would happen next. And same with when BTE would come out, I would like be watching BTE like first thing in the morning as soon as I woke up, because it would come out while I was asleep, and as soon as I woke up I'd want to watch BTE and see what like the next thing that they were doing in that. And that, I don't know, that just seems the achievement of being able to book it so well for so long it is massive. And like you've got the matches as part of that, you've got the Revolution tag, Stadium Stampede, then of course, like the first singles match that they had together, and then the elimination tag match, and of course then the final one at Full Gear. Maybe this Texas Death match is better than any of those matches individually. Probably not better than the Revolution tag match, but like that's yeah, like that's pretty much like I've said that's the Andre Hogan for AEW. So the other one, the other ones that I'd compare it to, as I said, like I find it really hard to compare to Eddie Mox. Like if I watched Eddie Mox, I'd probably think that's better, and then I'd come back and watch this and be like, oh no, Hangman Mox is better. Punk MJF, I think like what those guys did character-wise in that feud is pretty special as well. Similar to this, like in the way that they like really boil down to one another. They start out like very much peacocking with one another, and then they like strip the layers down to the point where like, they're questioning the very heart of who they are in the lead up to that dog collar match. I'd probably say the match isn't quite as good, but it's still a bloody good match. Like, and what that did for both men was pretty big as well. Like it really set both of those guys up on the courses that they would go through in the lead up to Double or Nothing 2022, which both of them then very quickly kind of self-imploded after it. But that feud itself was incredible, and was another one where I was like hanging off every moment of it. It's amongst the best of the best, and I think it doesn't get recognized that way because, as you said, like there's so many distractions that were going on around that at the time, and I think it's something that will be looked back on very favorably, particularly when you look at where both of these men are going to end up. Like both of them are going to be Hall of Famers, and this thing is going to be looked at as like, look, this is this time when they came together and like they created something magic.
I think we can sum it up better than that. It did feel magic, and it's nice when you look forward to something for so long, and then obviously it took an extra year to kind of get to, and then happened out of the blue, and then it becomes something else. That's pretty cool because for me it's like these are the two characters I gravitated to the most coming into AEW, and I always wanted to see that, and then it exceeded everything that I thought it could be, and that doesn't happen that often. So, indeed.
Trish, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to get back into this podcast. I'm hoping to continue to do these fortnightly. So make sure if you did enjoy this conversation that we've had, that you do subscribe to the podcast either on the Social Suplex feed or on the AEW Match Guide feed. And you can follow me on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I can't promise that I will be at all regular in terms of posting anything on there, but you can reach out to me there. Or, as I said at the top, join the Discord. We've got a fantastic Discord for the Social Suplex, and there'll be a link to it in the description. Trish, as I said, thank you for coming on. Is there anything you would like to plug before we get out of here?
All right, I've got to be good at this stuff now. Sarah keeps telling me. You've mentioned everything at Social Suplex, but I am one half of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast, which you can find on there every other Sunday, where we'll get right into so much detail. It will drive you insane. And but hopefully find some enjoyment in as well. God, absolutely. But no, it's we appreciate everyone that has joined us for that one. It's gone crazy in the last 7-8 months. So come and join us whenever you can.
Indeed. And as I said, congratulations on your success with it. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't inspired by what you guys have been doing and what you guys have brought to the network as to one of the reasons that I've come back to this. But look, as I said, thank you so much. This is one that I've had locked in the chamber for quite a while. We had to wait a little while for Jon Moxley and Hangman to lock it up, and I had to wait a while before I got to chat to someone about this. And I'm so glad to be relaunching the podcast with talking about this and talking to you, Trish. So thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And you can find links to Trish's Twitter and also the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast in the description. And look, I thank you once again for joining me. It's been a while between drinks, so thank you for staying subscribed. And I look forward to joining you again in about a fortnight's time where we'll talk about another one of AEW's greatest matches. But until then, thanks for listening, and I'll say goodbye. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.